Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 178. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_ on Twitter, joined by my co-host, John White, at VJourneyman. Hey, John, how's it going?
Doing great, Nick. Hey, I just want to remind everybody that we are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations, and we hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you are subscribing and listening to us. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to career enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Awesome, John. Thanks for that. This is episode 178 and marks part 2 of a discussion with Stephanie Wong, who is the head of developer engagement at Google Cloud. So let's recap episode 177, which was part 1 of our interview if you missed it last week. We talked a little bit about Stephanie's path into technology and some of the internships she was a part of, which are fascinating if you haven't heard about them. She was in the Class of program at Oracle, got into pre-sales and then post-sales. And then she did something really interesting and said no to her dream company, Google Cloud. You'll find that she did get an offer from Google Cloud for the role that she wanted, and we also talk about her path into this arena of content creation. John, what are we going to talk about this week?
I just want to say, if you haven't listened to episode 177, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to it, because as good as your recap was, like, the actual conversation with Stephanie was just amazing. What a treat to talk to her. And a treat to listen to the episode back again. I think the thing that I want to have people like maybe listen out for is our discussion about that generalist specialist divide again. Like, that's come up again in a completely different context than it normally comes up. So just really fascinating to hear that pattern pop up.
We also dive into traditional backgrounds and untraditional backgrounds in a different way in this episode too. So listen for that.
Yeah. I thought that was terrific. And then she talks a little bit about, growing into comfort in your own skin when it comes to your job. I thought that was pretty cool. And then I think there was like one last thing that you pointed out to me that was kind of neat. What was that again?
We're also going to hear some advice for the high school students out there who are a bit confused about what they should do. So whether you're a high school student listening to this, someone who's in college fresh out, or a parent of one of those folks, listen carefully.
All right. Let's not delay any further. Let's listen to part 2 of our discussion with Stephanie Wong.
On a serious note, though, I love your craftsmanship approach to the content creation, doing it because you love it for the sake of the work and not being so concerned about getting it perfect. Because I think a lot of people, myself included, fight perfectionism, especially if you can re-record it. The thing I love about live conference presentations is you can't re-record it. There's no way for me to do it over. It's over. Mm-hmm. But if I have to record it and then submit it, I can always make it better to the point where I may drive myself crazy doing so.
Yeah, that is actually a blessing and a curse. And that's why a lot of people prefer live talks. And they feel more comfortable. And it's kind of interesting. I've seen people so natural, so flawless on stage, and then you get them in the studio and they forget how to speak. So it really is about just practicing. People all the time ask me whether speaking on camera comes naturally, but it really doesn't. Over the last 4 years, I've improved my speaking abilities tremendously. I used to be very stiff and I didn't know what to do with my hands. And now I have a lot more expression. I can speak much more naturally. I've figured out what my voice and my style is. And I'm much more comfortable with the content itself that I'm speaking about. And that helps a lot as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think we've noticed the same progression when we do the podcast. Like when we first started out, sometimes I would just have like observations without any questions, but that doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
Just once in a while, we get the John White observation.
Right.
That's actually a test for the guest to see if you're going to respond, and if not, then he'll throw in a question. But it's really to test you.
Okay. Well, hopefully I pass the test.
That's my story. Sticking to it. So that actually naturally does get us back to that question that, we kind of started in with, which was, I know my experience at Google Cloud is that there's this massive portfolio of products and it's not shrinking, right? It's growing. You could be an expert at everything, and then tomorrow a company's been acquired and their product is now in the portfolio, or something new has been launched. So how do you stay on top of that? Or do you have this like fear, constantly of being asked to like be an expert at something that you've never heard of?
I get asked this question all the time, and my opinion of it has changed. When I first joined DevRel, I was surrounded by some of the world's best engineers, and they had pivoted from software engineering or other development jobs into Google Cloud, or they got hired because of their expertise in their domain, whether that being they were working at a prior company where they managed Python client libraries, or they were the database expert or a NoSQL expert, and that's why we hired them. So for someone like me who was always a generalist, walking into DevRel, I felt so many shortcomings and a massive feeling of imposter syndrome. So I never felt like I was really on top of everything. However, this team was very different than the rest of DevRel because the whole point wasn't to hire people for their expertise. The point was that we hire people for, yes, their technical acumen, but more importantly, their ability to execute content for developers quickly and effectively. And that was what we were trying to build from the ground up, with a very strong culture. So looking back on it, my expertise isn't a particular topic or a technology, but it is the ability to distill these complex topics across the board for technical content creation. So I would say that is my specialty. And so I want people to realize that you don't have to have a specialization in the traditional methods that you might think of in tech. Like, there is a whole world out there where you can have a specialization in tech that doesn't fit within the box that you see out there, right?
It sounds like they are trying to get people who are good teachers and know how to meet the audience where they are. That's what I thought of.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what it is. That is exactly what it is. And that is a skill set that's not just in my team. That's for sales engineering. That's for a lot of roles in tech. If you can get good at that, you can be successful in almost any organization or role, I think. And the other thing I'll say is that I had to come to the conclusion that being an expert in one domain isn't me. Like, I can do it, and there are plenty of people who want to be more specialized, so they will naturally gravitate towards those roles. But for me, I truly enjoy being a generalist, and I think I'm great at it, and that's the direction I want to go. And I'm gonna double down on that. The way I stay on top of things is being okay with, staying on top to the extent that makes me successful in my role. And if I need to go deeper in an area, I can spend the time to do that, or I leverage the expertise of other people. So really knowing your resources around you and the network that you have at hand is a powerful skill.
So fascinating. It actually speaks to something that we've talked about and covered before, which is the kind of generalist specialist divide. And one of the conclusions that we came to was, those terms can kind of lose their meanings. I remember when I was first leaving IT to kind of focus on VMware technology, for example, one of the things I was concerned about was not being a generalist anymore and just being a VMware specialist. And then when I showed up at VMware, I realized I was going to be a VMware generalist. And there were specialists, at VMware and specific VMware technologies. And then, I was like, well, I'll bring in a networking specialist for that. And then sometimes those networking specialists would say, well, I'm actually kind of a networking generalist. Like if you are, worried about like network audit, then there's a specific person for that, or, firewall rule. It just goes on and on and on, and to more and more granular things, until you're at the most granular level. And that person might say, well, I'm not the developer in that thing. I'm just, I'm just, the person who implements it. If you really want to talk to a specialist, then you have to talk to somebody who's writing code to implement those things. It's like, it doesn't end, right?
Yeah. And that's why I think it's even more important to remind yourself of what you actually find interesting. Like, what do you care about? And just focus on that. If you want to learn more and you want to work towards a job that requires you to learn more, then do it. That's great. Just don't try to compare yourself to other people who might actually have more experience in that area. That's something I really had to fight when I was in DevRel, because again, I was surrounded by people who were experts in one thing, and the ways that we were getting measured were very different than how DevRel has been doing it for years. So we had to define new metrics. We had to define how valuable our work was in comparison to their work. So it was a whole years of building my credibility and proving to people and engineers that what I did was really valuable for our developer audience.
Did the people you worked with, Stephanie, who were very deep in one area, what was their attitude toward you as maybe more of a generalist coming onto that team and being a part of their group?
I think that there was a lot of skepticism in the beginning, right? It's like, oh, you have a customer engineer coming to DevRel. Not sure how that's going to play out. And they're doing content, like online content creation. Not sure that that's really valuable for our audience. However, like I said, I had to push through it. I had to get through the imposter syndrome. I had to build the relationships. I had to put out great work and build partnerships across the org and executives that put me at, more of a front and center role and get more visibility. And that's why I think it's even more important that you not only be great at what you do from craftsmanship point of view, but also build the relationships with the right people so that you get your work in front of the right people and they can really advocate for you. Because the director that ended up referring me to my manager and getting me hired, he was the one who truly was a sponsor in getting me to transition pay structures into DevRel officially, because that was a whole hiring process. And he was the one who advocated for my work down the line, like the videos that I ended up doing, giving me recognition publicly, things like that. And that convinced the rest of the org to slowly start to give me some more respect. Not saying they didn't before, but, it helped.
It's interesting because it kind of maybe breaks the mold, maybe, redefining what the job is, right? Developer relations. Again, maybe I might be reading too much into this. Is like before, it sounds like maybe it was a little bit more of like a in-person, like one-to-many type of engagement, as opposed to writing content, which is one-to-many. It's just like you don't know, like those many people aren't all sitting in the same room listening to you. They're separated by time and reading the content that you're writing. Mm-hmm. Or same thing with a podcast, or same thing with a video, right? It's like you can measure, and you can say I've reached the same or even a larger audience. It's just like it's not concentrated in time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, again, maybe that's just a blinders thing. Well, that's not how we're measured today. So, if you're not doing that, then it just is different from how we've done it. So I can, I guess, empathize with the skepticism, but, hopefully, you have people around that say, well, just because we've done it that way doesn't mean they're always going to do it that way. And somebody needs to be doing this other thing.
Yeah. And I think it made it tough because we were on the same ladder or the same evaluation criteria. So there really was more of a reason to say, how do we know that their work is just as valuable as what I do? Because they get thousands of views on theirs, and maybe I did a conference talk for 300 people live. What makes one better than the other? It can't be just pure vanity metrics like that. So what ended up happening was centering our evaluations more based on the complexity of what we were doing and providing value to our stakeholders, right? Whether that's product, engineering, marketing, whoever. So we really, really believe in that as a good measurement. That being said, yes, it took some time for us to kind of build the right benchmarks and standards across various types of teams, because DevRel isn't just DAs. It also is made up of other engineers who support client libraries, who do more focused work like that, but sometimes do talks on the side. So the role it can be very undefined in some ways, and that leaves a lot of room for interpretation.
It sounds like another thing that we've heard of before, which is the tyranny of the metric. When the metric is one thing and somebody comes in and is doing something different, you go, oh, well, like that, feels like a threat, or, feels like it's not as important by, the old metrics. But again, the metric is just one expression of value. And if it doesn't necessarily actually measure success, then maybe it's not the success is the important thing. And the metric was just one way that we express that. You need to go back and revisit.
Yeah. I am not envious of people in the HR, people ops teams doing performance evaluations.
Yeah. Performance management is a whole overhead and headache. I don't think we asked this before, but, I looked on LinkedIn. Your title was Head of Developer Engagement. Does that mean that you have a team working underneath you? And are you a people manager at this point?
I am not currently, but I am about to. Hopefully. We'll see.
Oh,
but
okay.
The way that happened was last year, I had actually been tapped on the shoulder by my current director. He was a manager at the time who was speaking to marketing, and they wanted a central figure to be the voice for Google Cloud, the voice for Google Cloud launches for developers. And they wanted someone who was going to come out with a drumbeat of content anytime a product launch happened, and they would provide their own disruptive and very authentic takes on why these launches matter to the developer community. I stepped up to the plate and took on this ambiguous role and helped actually totally define it. And I built it from the ground up. So I built a whole process behind it. I built relationships with marketing, PR, product management, product marketing management. And I essentially have my ear to the ground for any tier 1, tier 2, any launches. And I come out with a multi-pronged approach to creating launch go-to-market content strategy for developers. So I'll do videos, a podcast episode, blog posts, like even social media, and make sure that it is getting to the heart of what developers care about and not just the product announcement itself or marketing.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you are writing it all or being the expert at each one of those launches, does it? Does it sometimes mean you're interviewing the expert, maybe?
Yeah, it can mean that. But for the first 6 to 8 months, I was writing everything because I needed to figure out what my voice was, and I wanted to be a true thought leader in the industry. So that meant researching. That meant, taking in loads of information from different product teams. But I was used to doing that because at the time I had been in DevRel fine-tuning my skill sets for 3 years. And that required me to take on projects from all these product teams, consume the information, teach it back, apply it, and create a 5-part video series anyway. But this time it was a lot more, fast-paced, and it was context switching even more frequently. So it was actually a good progression for my skills, and I thought it was a great opportunity to advance my career to be more of a face of Google Cloud and the voice of Google Cloud. And it since has been really rewarding. I've also now started to build sort of this working group where I delegate a lot of the writing to them.
Yeah.
And it was through this building on your own that you're able to find your voice and your style that you mentioned before. Do you have any tips for other people who maybe haven't found that unique voice or style in whatever it is they do today?
Yeah, the biggest tip I have is to start to write and start to talk about these topics, because 2 years ago, at least, I did a series called Eyes on Enterprise where I wanted to create this sort of sportscast interview segment with experts to talk about various topics like security, networking, migration strategies to the cloud. And I would try to ask these like hard-hitting questions to the experts. I remember it was very memorized for me. Like I would ask the question, I would have maybe small commentary, and then I would move on to the next question because I was so nervous about whether or not I knew how to respond adequately, right? But just through repeating that process so many times and doing a lot of research, and then I picked up the podcast in 2021, I just kind of put myself out there beyond my comfort zone. And I was like, you know what? I'll just get thrown into the fire. If I don't know something, I just ask from a point of pure curiosity and not being the expert in the room. And eventually I just started to roll with the punches and be able to respond and know how to talk about Kubernetes to networking to compute at a certain depth very comfortably now.
It's funny. What I heard was it took time.
Oh yeah. Be patient. That's the lesson here.
And you acquire depth like over time, like through repeated exposure, it sounded like, and that level of comfort was, again, something that you gained over time with repeated exposure.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this strategy, but even for folks in universities and schools or just anyone learning, when you read a book or you read a white paper, consuming the information the first time, you're only going to retain like 20% of it, right? It's only the next time, even if you highlight things in the book, it's, you can only retain so much of it. It's only when you play that back and you start writing everything you remember down on a book, that's when you start doing that information. What would you call it? It's like you're retrieving that information and you're applying that knowledge and you're teaching back to others. That's when you start learning.
Analysis or synthesis, isn't that like the top of the learning pyramid?
Mm-hmm.
We did this discussion a while back on actually on deep learning. It was a big part of it. How do you actually learn something deeply and replay it? And a big part of that answer, it seemed to be was teaching it, right? Mm-hmm. So the writing down was important, and writing it down, oftentimes when you're taking notes, the person that you're teaching is your future self. I'm writing this down so that when I come back and pick this up, I'll be able to have these highlights and triggers to other parts of my memory. But even if I don't trigger those parts of my memory, then I'm going to leave myself breadcrumbs to be able to pick those things back up. Mm-hmm. And eventually you progress to not just teaching yourself, but teaching other people until you do that. It's really difficult to say I'm an expert at this thing, or I have deep knowledge of this thing if you can't explain it to somebody else.
Exactly.
That's a level of knowledge. And not everybody's a good teacher. You can be a good doer and not a good teacher, but to be able to explain a concept to somebody like that really is one test of actual knowledge of that concept.
Yeah. And that's honestly 90% of what I do in my job, is distilling complex topics into engaging, fun narratives that actually delight developers, because developers are people and they want to be delighted, not just talked at. And everybody has a different learning style too: visual, reading, listening. And so my job is to break things down and what we call shard the content, like database sharding. You maximize your reach by converting your content into different formats.
One thing that I wanted to comment on, that idea of sharding, that I've always found fascinating, is this idea that once you break something down into bite-sized pieces, kind of like consumable units, you're kind of breaking it down. I don't know, different people break things down in different ways, and it kind of reflects how their brain works. How you shard something reflects how you think about something. Those different ways of thinking about things they're not more or less valid from person to person. It's just different. Our brains work differently sometimes. And that's a fascinating thing to see how, person A shards complex content into more understandable pieces and how person B does it. Actually, I'm sorry, this might be a little bit of a rough transition, but that actually sparks a different thought. And that is the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know that that's something that, in my experience, Google Cloud has been, very proud of. How has your experience of that topic been a benefit or a hindrance in your career? Have you come across people who thought, oh, wow, different people with different topics or different ways of thinking and different backgrounds, that's going to be a benefit to our team? Or has it been more of a hindrance?
It's always been a benefit in my experience. I mean, I guess I'll ask that question back to you. Do you mean my identity or the makeup of the people that I've always worked with and the culture that it's provided?
Oh, that's an interesting way to reflect that thing back to me, because I think I don't necessarily think about it that way. I guess when you talk about diversity, you could think about that as just diversity of thought or diversity of background, but it could be diversity of ethnic identity and diversity of cultural background. So I guess my answer is both.
Yeah. So I think in terms of diversity of thought, that's always been great on my teams, at least, because like you said, people break things down differently. And a lot of people get hung up on whether they're creating a blog post correctly because there is a right or a wrong way to do it. But I think honestly, audiences appreciate how you learn to do it. they want to follow your journey. How did you pick up this concept? Walk me through the demo that you built, because a lot of times you know more than them based on the role that you're in. And so I really think all the content that we create on this team is really valuable. And we do have some guidance on how to create content quickly by using a really proven method of like problem solution or a 5-point argument models to help you get your ideas on paper. But when it comes down to it, learning and applying that knowledge on paper is really great to start with. I also think that this is kind of related to imposter syndrome, because people get hung up on this idea that they aren't adequate on their team because they have a different background, like I did. And I have a different way of learning concepts or a different understanding of something. And many times it's because when you look at teams in tech, you might not see someone that has the same background as you or even looks like you. And so to get over that, you really have to just put more content out there in the way that you learned it, your own perspective. And I think that's actually a step towards having better representation or diversity of thought. In terms of my identity, I think in the beginning of my career, there were some microaggressions, like you only got to where you are because XYZ, or you didn't get to this because of XYZ, or, I'm a pageant queen in my past and I'm a dancer, and maybe some people have their own misconceptions or stereotypes about that. But honestly, like in the most recent years, and actually for the most part of my career, it's been great, because I have realized that being proud of who you are and bringing all of your external interests out in the open is great, because you control the narrative. You're not leaving any room for interpretation. You're not letting anybody have they can have their own opinions, but they might not say it to you because you're controlling the narrative externally. So I am just loud and proud about my dance background and my pageant background, because I think it's so important to showcase to other people that they can be multidimensional people in tech, especially for women of color. That's the way I see it, and I think it served me really well. I will say, when I first joined engineering, I was very scared that background would not help me, because I had to look and act like a stereotypical engineer who's like very like heads down, serious, like coded, and that just like wasn't really me at my heart. And so for the longest time, until very recently, I felt like I needed to change who I was.
So I'm going to ask if this is an appropriate analogy, because I've come across that exact same thing in dance. People think when they're learning how to dance or, learning something, that they need to look a certain way. And so they will take on what they think that person is supposed to look like when they're doing that thing. In this, analogy, dance. I think that hip-hop dancers look and act like this. So when I try to do that thing, I will start to act and look like what, in my mind, that group looks like. At least in my observation, that exact same thing, that thing happened in swing dance, right? Oh, my vision of somebody who is a professional swing dancer looks like this and they act like this. Therefore, when I'm learning this, I will look and act like that. This idea and stereotype that they have in their mind. So is that a little bit of what you're talking about when looking and acting like a developer?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple angles to it. It was the technical component. Like, I need to learn these skill sets and I need to be great at programming in at least one language proficiently or advanced. And I need to truly enjoy doing live demos. I need to go do live talks, and all of my content needs to be level 200 or, more. I also didn't feel that I could be super fashionable at work, because I was like, oh, I need to be like a serious engineer who fits the part and wear zip up hoodies and all of that. So the first year or two I was in DevRel, I dressed down. So it was those two aspects of it, looks and the job function itself.
I can imagine that. It's not a perfect analogy. Dance never is a perfect analogy. I try to make it a perfect analogy, though.
Depends how well you want to master a skill, right? If you want to be somebody in the role that you look up to because they are good at mastering how to, I don't know, do some migration with zero downtime. There are certain skills you need to do artfully and well. So I think from the dance comparison, it's if you're going to be a ballet dancer, there is a right or wrong way to do something, right? But if you're going to be a freestylist, like maybe it doesn't matter so much, right? So I think you got to just kind of evaluate what is important to the goal that you have in mind.
Well, imitation probably is always the first step, right? And it's just, I would say maybe early on, most people don't actually have the knowledge to know exactly what it is that they should be imitating, right? They're imitating a stereotype in their brain, and they don't know exactly what to imitate. And so like early on, maybe what you're actually learning is what you should be imitating. And then like as you get more advanced, that's when you get to throw your own variations and flavors in.
Yeah.
So, and then at the very end, you become an innovator. So imitation, variation, innovation.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's like
You're right.
That's like the musician who grows up on someone else's songs and then they start writing their own.
Yeah, I think I'm in the third phase now. Like I've gained enough credibility. People aren't really raising their eyebrow at my work as much. And so now it's like I'm less afraid to be who I am and dress up when I want to and be proud of my pageant experience and my dance and bring that to the table every day. I mean, I like to say that I have always done that, but there was a period of hesitation there until I was sure that I had proven myself, for better or worse.
Are there some ways, Stephanie, that you would recommend folks like John and myself and others listening who can be allies of people who are different than us so that they feel safe to be who they are, at work and otherwise?
This is why I always tell people to always be authentic and don't be like me. Don't be afraid of your passions, your interests, your identity. Because like I said, once you control the narrative from the get-go, it leaves little room for interpretation or their own ways of seeing you. So if you can just do that from the beginning, then that's how you change the conversation. And I do think cloud or tech as an industry is changing. I think cloud is very welcoming and very open to people of different backgrounds, non-technical backgrounds, people from different parts of the world. All the stereotypes that have impacted our perception of technology and our ability to break into it are starting to change. And I attribute that to all of the people that are extremely open about their journeys into tech, and to this podcast as an example too.
It's such a young industry, right? The industry is so young that it can't afford to be staid and stodgy. Maybe that is my comment. The organizations that are succeeding have to throw away that part of, even if they have the instinct to do that, you just can't afford to do it and be successful. You can't say, we're only looking to hire people with 30 years of cloud experience, because that doesn't exist.
This is such a good point. And that's why I think I'm lucky to have entered the job market during a time where it was exploding. But yeah, out of pure necessity, they can't look for the traditional engineers of, the last 2 decades. They have to pick the people who are learning these technologies, pushing the industry forward, eager-minded students and young professionals from all parts of the world, not just Silicon Valley or the US.
To that point, Stephanie, if we go back to the very beginning, I have seen a lot of threads on Reddit from high school students not knowing what they want to do. Like, they're frustrated that they can't decide. What would you tell a high school student about the value of things like internships and apprenticeships based on your experience and how it could boost their career?
So I struggled with the concept that I had to find my passion in life and that there was only one passion. And if I didn't, I would be struggling. If I did, I would never work a real day in my life, right? And I came to realize down the road that that is such an outdated phrase, because there are so many paths in life and everything is temporary if you want it to be. In fact, I was able to find a passion through trying a bunch of different things and just increased effort in these areas. So I would say, if my journey has taught you anything, it's that you just got to try different things all the time. And if you're teetering between one thing and the other, follow your intuition. If it feels right in your heart, or if it feels exciting and challenging for you. I did internships in dance and video and tech, and then, things just started to happen and ended up in sales engineering. And then I went to DevRel. So all of these things were bridged together through me saying yes to things that gave me more visibility or let me play around with cameras more and let me learn about new concepts that felt fun. So in high school, like I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I didn't even know what I wanted to major in. I just picked up communications because I was forced to. At the end of my sophomore year, I had to pick a major, and I was like, I'm just going to go with this one. So, you don't have to figure it all out. Life is a journey. I could stop doing tech in the next 3 years and I might become a full-time TikToker. So who knows, right? This role that I'm in now didn't even exist 4 years ago. My manager started the team, and it just so happened that I crossed paths with him when I started playing around with video content. So do not think about it too much, because the next 10 years, the next 3 years are going to look totally different than they do now.
It's a really interesting observation, because Nick asked about somebody in high school, and you just pointed out that this role didn't exist 4 years ago. So when you were in high school, it would have been almost impossible to aspire to this role.
Yeah.
Right? You can identify things that you're passionate about and figure out things that you're good at over time, and have a little bit of faith that the roles that might combine those things might not even exist today, but you could maybe help create them, or they might exist by the time you're ready for them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in high school, you just haven't experienced enough of life yet. There's just a whole world out there of different paths you can take. You just haven't even, you're just barely scratching the surface of what life has to offer, right? So how are you expected to know what your passions are if you haven't even seen everything that the world has to offer? That phrase, the world is your oyster, it's maybe a little bit overdone, but it's true. Because I was totally scared when I graduated from college, because I was like, oh, what do I do now? It's terrifying. And I was actually jealous of the med school students because they already had a set path, and the lawyers too. But now looking back, I'm like, thank goodness I didn't do that, because I would have been more committed to that, and maybe would have felt like a lot of lost, almost like I wasted time doing it if I wanted to quit, and the sunk cost. And so I'm actually grateful that I had an open-ended future, that I could take any path. And if the current media landscape has taught me anything, it's that you could be a TikToker, you could be a YouTuber, you could be a business owner, you could be an entrepreneur. You don't even have to work in corporate America. That's the other beauty of it. You can make your own position.
Stephanie, I think that's kind of a mic drop moment. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to come talk to us on the Journey podcast. And I really look forward to, at some point in the future, asking you to come back on and discuss the next great thing that you're doing. We'd be really excited to hear about the next steps that you're taking, the new roles you're creating, and the amazing future that is rolling out.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think this conversation, who knows, maybe next time I talk to you, I will be the expert in IoT devices for underwater basket weaving.
Nice. That are powered by AI, right?
Oh, yeah. There's always AI involved.
And exclusively explaining it on TikTok.
Of course, in the proper shards. If people want to follow up on this conversation, Stephanie, where can they find you?
They can find me at StephR_Wong, WONG. And that's on Twitter, Steph R. Wong on LinkedIn, and TikTok as well. I have a YouTube channel called Steph You Should Know as well.
Nice. We'll make sure we get all those links in the show notes.
Great. Thanks so much,
Steph You
everyone.
Should Know is amazing.
Yeah, I thank my partner for thinking of that one.
Amazing. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, Nick, I thought that was a fascinating conversation.
Absolutely.
I really hope that we get a chance to talk to Stephanie again and just keep that conversation going. I thought she had something just, fascinating to say about finding your own voice by just doing the thing and working out, the awkwardness and the things that you don't know in the process of doing the thing. There's no way that you can kind of, at least my takeaway from that was, it's probably not possible to find your voice by just practicing. You actually have to do the thing, like, in public, live, in production, to figure out like all the things that you need to work out, the rough edges that you need to sand off. I don't know if that's what you heard, but that's what I heard.
Yeah, I think that's part of that feedback loop that comes with the deliberate practice that we've read about in various books.
You definitely have to practice, but then you definitely have to, you can't just only practice. You have to go out and actually do the thing. You have to play in the tennis tournament. You have to go out and shoot an actual round of golf. You have to...
Bless you for using a tennis analogy, sir. Did you just do that for me?
I just did that for you.
Thanks, man.
I also found it interesting to hear about her experiences with, bringing a diversity of voice and background into that developer engagement team. Maybe having people have, some slight skepticism, about her background in the job because she wasn't a professional developer, but then being able to bring something to that, because not everybody has to have the same background in order to bring value to a position.
Yeah, breaking down some of the stereotypes of what a person in job XYZ should look like.
Yeah. And then obviously, we had a really good discussion about analogies from dancing. So,
well, yeah, it wouldn't have been complete without that. I mean, that's what made the episode for me.
I think that we need to just go out and find more people with technical careers who also have a background in dance, because that is the strong common thread that I'm starting to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of common threads, I have to share a really cool story if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So as I was working on the edit for this interview, we were out of town at my wife's friend's house, staying with them for the weekend. And so my daughter, 12 years old, and her best friend, same age, were hanging out close to where I was. My daughter comes out over and asked what I was doing, and I had Audacity open. And what are you doing? Well, I'm editing this interview. And she sat down at my computer, and I told her a little bit about Stephanie, about her background, and about what she does today with the content creation focus. And my daughter goes, I want to do that. And then I let each one of them listen to part of the interview with Stephanie. It wasn't much, right? A couple minutes. Mm-hmm. And her friend goes, oh, where's she from? Well, she's from the West Coast, from the San Francisco area. And she listened and she goes, she sounds just like us. And I probably won't ever forget that now, because that moment of, oh, wow, here's someone who's like me, who's accomplished something amazing and doing something that sounds so interesting that I never considered before.
Yeah, I really like that moment, and I just imagine that it's happening over and over again. Hopefully, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah, it's very difficult to believe that you can do something without first seeing somebody like you doing it. Mm-hmm. So, like, that's a very important part of diversity, equity, and inclusion is, finding the people who can, from diverse backgrounds, who can do the thing to kind of welcome in and show to everybody out there that they are welcome to apply for that position too, and that you too can have a job like this.
I was just excited that two 12-year-old girls got excited about something that I was doing, 41-year-old nerd.
Yeah, I hear you. Like, I want my daughter to think about, a technical career as a real possibility. I'm looking forward to her listening to these podcasts 18 years from now and having the light bulb turn on. That might be too late. 12 years from now? Yeah, that makes more sense.
Well, here's what I'm thinking. Why don't you just have them on repeat in her nursery?
There you go.
And she'll just soak them in early. And it'll be that soothing voice that she gets to take in each time, Just think about it.
Yeah, that sounds like a terrible idea. But I will take it under advisement. Thank you very much for that advice. Just watching you on mute, laughing your head off is a treat for today. that's gonna carry me for the rest of the day. I also like want to point out something that, you know, we talked about that kind of emerged at the end, which is the idea that when you're in school or you know, thinking about you know, what you should be doing, you might have a great job that you are perfect for that has not been created yet. Like it just hasn't even been thought of yet. And that idea kind of like buoyed me as well. You know, like there's a lot of stuff out there that, you know, we could be good for, that just, you know, that pattern hasn't emerged yet. We just have to acquire skills, strive for excellence in whatever it is that we're doing, and keep dreaming in bands, you know, because we don't necessarily, you know, the job might not have been created, or we might even not know about the job that we're perfect for, you know, and there's somebody out there that's looking for us to do it. So that, like I said, kind of buoyed me.
I dig it, man. And sometimes your specialty isn't necessarily some deep technical expertise in one area. Sometimes the specialty is being a generalist. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. That idea of like what you're good at is going out and like synthesizing information very quickly and making other people really excited about that with your, you know, explanation and exploration of those topics. Fascinating. That was super exciting.
Or maybe your expertise is just making a great observation to see if the guest responds instead of asking a question, right?
Well, in that case, I have that skill in spades.
Oh, man. I think that's everything we had planned. Anything pop into your mind while we chatted?
Nope. Nothing else from me. But I do want to remind people again that we'd like them to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever they happen to be listening. We want to know if we're being helpful, and we're always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey, so feel free to reach out to us there.
And don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_ for the one and only John White at VJourneyman, signing off.
Adios.